In 2003, the CIA quietly added a document to its public reading room. It had been classified for 20 years. It was 49 pages long, and its title, Analysis and Assessment of Gateway Process, told you almost nothing about what was inside. What was inside was a United States Army lieutenant colonel's detailed investigation into whether human beings could separate their consciousness from their bodies, travel outside time and space, and contact intelligences in other dimensions. The report was real. The author was real. The CIA stamp was real. And for 20 years, nobody noticed. Then, in 2021, someone posted it on TikTok. Within days, millions of people had read a document their government had quietly buried for 2 decades, a document that discussed hemisync audio technology, out-of-body experiences, holographic reality, and the nature of consciousness itself. The comment sections erupted. The CIA studied astral projection. NASA was connected. The military had remote viewers on the payroll. Was it proof of something extraordinary? Or was it proof that extraordinary things had been studied, which is not the same thing at all? The document was written in 1983 by Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonald of the United States Army. He had been tasked by his superiors with assessing the Gateway experience, a program developed at the Monroe Institute in Virginia to determine whether it had any military or intelligence applications. McDonald was not a mystic. He was not a fringe thinker. He was a career military officer with a physics background, trying to write a logical analysis of something that did not fit inside logic very comfortably. If you read the Gateway document, you will eventually reach a point where you expect page 25. You will not find it. The document jumps from page 24 to page 26. Page 25 is missing, not classified, not redacted, simply absent, a gap in the record that the CIA has never explained. What was on page 25? Nobody knows, and the absence of an explanation for its absence has fueled more speculation than any single page of any document probably deserves. Before this story goes any further, it is worth being precise about what the Gateway document actually says. It does not say that out-of-body travel is real. It says that a particular type of audio technology, binaural beats called hemisync, produces measurable changes in brainwave patterns that the author believed might enable altered states of consciousness. It argues, using physics concepts like holographic theory and quantum mechanics, that these altered states could theoretically allow access to an energy field that contains all information. The document is an attempt to make fringe ideas sound respectable using the vocabulary of science. Whether it succeeds is a question you will have to answer for yourself.
The Gateway Program existed because of Robert Monroe. Monroe was not, by background, a spiritual seeker. He was a radio broadcasting executive in New York in the late 1950s, a practical, commercially minded man who had built a successful business. In 1958, Monroe began experimenting with sound patterns he believed could enhance learning during sleep. While testing them on himself one afternoon, he felt his arm go numb. Then the numbness spread. Then he left his body. For the next 9 months, Monroe experienced what he would later describe as spontaneous out-of-body episodes, events that happened without his control, often at night, often terrifying. He documented everything with the precision of a man trained in broadcasting: the sensations, the locations he believed he visited, the things he observed. He consulted doctors, he consulted psychiatrists. Neither could find anything physically wrong with him. He consulted a neurosurgeon who told him bluntly, "Either this is real or you're insane. You don't appear to be insane." Monroe chose to believe the first option. In 1974, Monroe opened the Gateway Program in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It was not a cult. It was not a church. It was, in Monroe's conception, a research facility, a place where the altered states he had been experiencing for 15 years could be studied, replicated, and eventually controlled. The centerpiece of the Institute was a technology Monroe had spent years developing. He called it hemisync. Hemisync worked by exploiting a quirk of human auditory perception. If you play a tone of 200 Hz into someone's left ear and a tone of 210 Hz into their right ear, the brain perceives a third tone, a binaural beat, at the difference between the two, 10 Hz. The brain then begins to synchronize its own electrical activity to that beat. 10 Hz is in the alpha wave range, the frequency associated with relaxed, meditative states. By varying the frequencies fed into each ear, Monroe claimed he could guide a person's brain into any state he wanted, and from those states, he believed, anything was possible. Participants at the Monroe Institute lay in small individual rooms called check units, controlled holistic environmental chambers. Each unit was a padded alcove, approximately the size of a single bed, soundproofed with speakers in the headrest and controls for lighting within reach. The program took place over 7 days. Participants would spend several hours each day lying in their check units, listening to hemisync audio through headphones, guided by Monroe's voice through a sequence of exercises designed to progressively deepen their state of consciousness. The goal was a state Monroe called Focus 10, mind awake, body asleep. Focus 10 was only the beginning. Focus 12 was described as expanded awareness, a state in which Monroe claimed participants became able to perceive information not available through the physical senses. Focus 15 was no time, a state removed from linear time entirely. Focus 21 was the outer edge, described as contact with other intelligent systems, other presences, other dimensions. Most participants, Monroe acknowledged, never reached Focus 21. Most reported Focus 10 as the deepest state they achieved, but enough reported something that sounded like more.
By the early 1980s, the Monroe Institute had quietly attracted a very specific type of visitor: Army officers, intelligence personnel, people who drove unmarked cars and listed vague affiliations on their registration forms. This was not an accident. The CIA and the Army had, for nearly a decade, been running a parallel program that had introduced military personnel to every serious altered states researcher they could find. When they found Monroe, they found something that looked different from anything else they'd seen. And in 1983, they sent Wayne McDonald to write it up. McDonald's report is extraordinary to read, not because it claims the supernatural is real, but because of how hard it tries to make the supernatural sound scientific. He invokes quantum physics, he cites holographic theory, he references the work of physicist David Bohm on the implicate order of reality. He is trying to build a bridge between the world his military training occupies and the world Monroe's participants claim to visit. Whether the bridge holds is another question, but he is, at minimum, taking the question seriously in a way that no mainstream institution would dare to. The conceptual centerpiece of McDonald's report is an idea borrowed from physicist David Bohm. Bohm argued that what we perceive as physical reality is a projection, like a hologram, of a deeper underlying order that contains all information simultaneously. If consciousness can access that deeper layer, then information about any point in space or time becomes theoretically available. This is the scientific-sounding scaffolding McDonald constructs around Monroe's program. It is also, it should be said, not a framework that mainstream physics recognizes as valid experimental science. But in 1983, in a classified report for the United States Army, it was enough. It is important to understand the cultural moment in which all of this was happening. The 1970s and early 1980s were a period of genuine scientific uncertainty about the nature of consciousness. Quantum mechanics had produced results that nobody fully understood. The relationship between the observer and the observed in physics was actively debated. and a generation of researchers, some serious, some less so, believed that consciousness might be something far more fundamental to the structure of reality than classical science had assumed. The CIA and the Army were, in their own way, children of this moment.
If you were designing a person to make the CIA take consciousness research seriously, you would design Edgar Mitchell. Naval officer, aeronautical engineer, MIT doctorate in aeronautics and astronautics, fighter pilot, test pilot. In February 1971, he was the 6th human being to walk on the moon, the lunar module pilot on Apollo 14. He was, by every external measure, the opposite of someone who should later spend decades arguing that consciousness is non-local and the government is covering up alien contact. And yet, during the Apollo 14 mission, while orbiting the moon and walking on its surface, Edgar Mitchell conducted an experiment that NASA had not authorized and did not know about. He had arranged, before launch, for 4 people on Earth to attempt to receive telepathic transmissions from him during the mission. The method was simple. Mitchell would focus on a sequence of symbols, the classic Zener card symbols used in ESP research since the 1930s: circle, cross, wavy lines, square, star, and attempt to mentally transmit them to the receivers in the United States. He did this during rest periods aboard the spacecraft when mission control assumed he was sleeping. Zener cards, developed by perceptual psychologist Carl Zener in the 1930s, were the standard tool of ESP research. 5 symbols, 25 cards in a deck, theoretical chance performance 20% correct. Mitchell's 4 receivers collectively scored above chance on a statistically significant basis, or so he believed at the time. However, there was a complication. The transmission schedule had been disrupted by a launch delay. Mitchell had been transmitting at the scheduled times, but his Earth-based receivers, not knowing about the delay, had been attempting to receive at the originally planned times. The sessions were misaligned by 40 minutes, and yet the results were still above chance. Mitchell considered this evidence of something extraordinary. His critics considered it evidence of measurement error. On February 5, 1971, Edgar Mitchell stepped onto the surface of the moon at the Fra Mauro Highlands. He spent 9 hours on the lunar surface over 2 EVAs, extravehicular activities. He walked almost 3.5 kilometers. He collected 42 kilograms of lunar samples. He was doing extraordinary science in an extraordinary place. But it was not on the moon that the most significant thing happened to him. It was on the way home. On the return journey from the moon, Mitchell was looking out the window at the Earth, the moon, the sun, and the stars cycling past the capsule as it rotated slowly in space. And something happened that he spent the rest of his life trying to describe. He felt, he said, an absolute certainty, not a belief, not a hope, but a certainty as physical as the seat beneath him, that everything he was looking at was connected, that the universe was in some sense intelligent, that consciousness was not a product of matter, but a property of the universe itself. In Sanskrit philosophy, the state he was describing has a name, samadhi. Sudden, overwhelming, ineffable unity with everything. Edgar Mitchell, Navy captain, MIT engineer, had had a mystical experience 200,000 miles from Earth. Edgar Mitchell did not keep this to himself. He tried to at first. He understood exactly what it sounded like. But when he landed and the mission was over and the debriefs were complete and the parades had passed, he began speaking to people whose work concerned consciousness and the nature of experience. He found them, and they found him, because having an astronaut,
a man with a PhD from MIT who had walked on the moon, standing at your conference and saying, "Something happened to me that I cannot explain by any framework I was given," was not a small thing. It was the most credible endorsement that consciousness research had ever received. In 1973, Edgar Mitchell founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences. IONS, as it became known, was a research organization dedicated to studying consciousness with the rigor of science. The word noetic comes from Greek, nous, meaning mind or intelligence. The institute studied intuition, healing, perception, and the limits of what human consciousness could access. It attracted scientists, philosophers, and meditators in roughly equal measure. It also attracted quietly and persistently interest from the intelligence community. Edgar Mitchell became, over time, associated with another set of claims that were considerably more contentious than his consciousness research. He stated publicly that he believed the United States government had been concealing evidence of alien contact for decades. He said he had been briefed by people he described as credible insiders. He said Roswell was real. He said a great deal. But in 2014, in an interview that received considerably less coverage than his earlier statements, he was asked directly, had he ever personally seen a UFO? His answer was simple. No, he had not. He had heard things from people he found credible, but he had never personally witnessed anything he could not explain.
The CIA did not develop an interest in consciousness research in a vacuum. Throughout the 1970s, intelligence assessments indicated that the Soviet Union was spending approximately 60 million rubles per year on parapsychology research. That is not a small number. That is the budget of a serious scientific program. The Soviets had dedicated facilities, they had researchers, they had a theoretical framework built on the work of their own physicists, and they had results, or claimed to have results, that the American intelligence community could not simply ignore. Soviet parapsychology research operated under several different labels: biocommunication, psychotronics, biophoton research, because the Soviets were as aware as the Americans of how the word parapsychology sounded in a scientific context. Their primary interests were similar to the CIA's: long-distance communication without physical channels, influence at a distance, and the military applications of both. They were specifically interested in a woman named Nina Kulagina, who appeared on film to move objects with her mind, and in a research tradition that went back to the work of Leonid Vasiliev, a physiologist who had studied telepathic hypnosis in the 1930s under Stalin. Here is the fundamental logic that drove a decade of American government spending on consciousness research. If the Soviets have a working remote viewing program, and we don't, and they use it to identify the locations of our nuclear submarines, we have a problem. The cost of finding out whether it worked was, in the context of the Cold War military budget, negligible. The cost of assuming it didn't work and being wrong was potentially existential. This is not irrational thinking. It is the logic of asymmetric risk applied to an idea that most of the people involved privately thought was probably nonsense.
In 1972, the CIA funded a program at Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California. The researchers were two physicists, Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff. Puthoff was a laser physicist with a background in quantum electronics. Targ was a physicist who had spent years studying lasers and was personally interested in psychic phenomena. Neither of them was, in the conventional sense, a parapsychologist. The CIA wanted physicists. They wanted people whose credibility was scientific and whose conclusions would carry weight in a briefing room. They hired the two and gave them a simple instruction: find out if remote viewing is real. The first significant person Targ and Puthoff tested was a New York artist and self-described psychic named Ingo Swann. Swann was unlike any subject they had worked with. He was not passive. He was not suggestible. He argued back. He told the researchers that their testing protocols were poorly designed, that they were measuring the wrong things in the wrong ways. He proposed his own protocol. Instead of asking someone to identify a card in a box, why not ask them to describe a location they had never been? The target would be defined by coordinates, a set of latitude and longitude numbers, nothing else. The protocol Swann developed became known as Coordinate Remote Viewing, CRV. A viewer would be given a set of geographic coordinates, nothing else. No photographs, no names, no context. The viewer would then describe, sketch, and otherwise record their impressions of what was at that location. Sessions were recorded. Results were compared to actual photographs of the sites. The matches, when they occurred, were sometimes striking enough that even skeptical observers had difficulty dismissing them entirely. In 1973, Ingo Swann and Pat Price, another remote viewing subject, were given coordinates and asked what they perceived. They described, separately and without contact with each other, a location that turned out to be a secret Soviet nuclear weapons facility at Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan. Both described a large building. Both described a crane of unusual design. Both described a sphere that was later identified as possibly consistent with nuclear weapons testing equipment. The CIA analysts who compared the descriptions to intelligence photographs were, by their own later accounts, more than a little unsettled. The CIA program expanded. Over the following years, it moved through a series of institutional homes and code names: Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak, and finally, in 1991, Stargate, the name under which it became publicly known. The budget across the full 23-year lifespan of the program was approximately $20 million. For context, the F-117 stealth fighter program cost roughly $7 billion. Stargate was not the main effort, it was the hedge, the anomaly in the budget that nobody wanted to admit existed and nobody wanted to cancel. By the late 1970s, the program had moved from Stanford to Fort Meade, Maryland, the home of the National Security Agency and one of the most sensitive military intelligence facilities in the United States. Here, the work became explicitly military. A small unit of Army personnel were selected, trained in coordinate remote viewing, and assigned to operational missions. These were not civilians. These were soldiers, following orders, filling out mission reports, maintaining security clearances. They were military remote viewers. And in a country that prided itself on hard-nosed pragmatism, they were on the Army payroll for nearly 2 decades.
The most decorated operational remote viewer in the history of the program was a man named Joseph McMoneagle. He was given the operational designation Remote Viewer Number 1. McMoneagle was an Army warrant officer from Florida. Not a mystic, not a spiritual seeker, but a field intelligence operator with a background in electronic surveillance in Vietnam and Europe. He did not go looking for psychic ability. He discovered it, or it discovered him, during a near-death experience in a restaurant in Austria in 1970. Research into near-death experiences has, over decades, documented a consistent set of reported after-effects: heightened intuition, changes in sensory perception, reduced fear of death, and, in some cases, what subjects describe as an expansion of awareness, a sense that the boundaries of the self are no longer where they were. McMoneagle reported something like this. When he returned to intelligence work after his recovery, his colleagues began noticing that his hunches were unusually accurate, that he sometimes knew things he had no apparent way of knowing.
When the Stargate program began recruiting, his name was already circulating. Over 17 years as part of the Stargate program, Joseph McMoneagle participated in approximately 450 remote viewing missions. These ranged from locating hidden Soviet weapon systems to identifying the nature of activity at classified facilities to providing information on missing persons and hostage situations. His performance was assessed by the program's oversight and judged sufficiently useful to keep the program running for nearly 2 decades. He never claimed to be infallible. He never claimed to be superhuman. He claimed to be right more often than chance would predict, and that the implications of that, if real, were worth taking seriously. In 1979, McMoneagle was given a mission with significant strategic implications. Intelligence had detected unusual activity at a Soviet shipyard, but could not determine from satellite imagery what was being built. McMoneagle was given the coordinates and asked to describe the facility. He described a large submarine. He described a propulsion system of unusual design. He described dimensions that were significantly larger than any Soviet submarine then known. Several months later, the Soviet Typhoon-class submarine, the largest submarine ever built, was publicly acknowledged. The dimensions McMoneagle had described were within acceptable margin of the Typhoon's actual specifications. It would be dishonest to discuss McMoneagle's successes without discussing his failures. Remote viewing sessions produced inaccurate results, sessions that were clear misses, descriptions that bore no resemblance to the target location. The program's defenders argued that even a success rate significantly above chance, even 20 or 30% accuracy in the right conditions, had intelligence value. The program's critics argued that selective attention to hits and systematic forgetting of misses was a well-documented feature of human psychology, and that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence that the program had never fully provided. Both arguments had merit.
Of all the operational missions attributed to Stargate, perhaps the most widely cited and most carefully scrutinized involved a fugitive, a map, and a name that was almost right. In 1989, the U.S. Customs Service was attempting to locate a fugitive named Customs Supervisory Agent Charlene Johansson asked the Stargate unit for assistance. Remote viewer Angela Della Fiora Ford was assigned to the case. She was given only the subject's name and photograph. Angela Della Fiora Ford's session produced a specific geographic impression. She described a location she named as Lowell, Wyoming. There is no town called Lowell in Wyoming. There is, however, a small community called Lovell, population approximately 2,000, located in the northern part of the state. When customs agents followed up on the lead, the fugitive was apprehended. He was found approximately 100 miles from Lovell, Wyoming. Whether this constitutes a successful remote viewing session, a near miss, or a coincidence in a large and sparsely populated state is a question that depends significantly on what you are already inclined to believe. The Della Fiora case illustrates the fundamental challenge of assessing the Stargate program. When a remote viewer names a location that is close to but not identical to the actual location, how do you score it? Is Lowell close enough to Lovell to count as a hit? How close does a hit have to be? These questions are not trivial. They are the core methodological challenge of a program that spent 20 years producing results that were always almost but never quite definitively convincing. The program's critics said this was because the results were a product of ambiguity and selective memory. The program's defenders said it was because consciousness doesn't work like a GPS.
The Gateway process and the Stargate program were not officially the same program. Gateway was a Monroe Institute civilian program that the Army assessed. Stargate was an active intelligence operation using trained military personnel, but they shared the same underlying question: can human consciousness access information that the physical senses cannot? And they were connected by the same institutional interest, a military and intelligence apparatus that had spent 2 decades quietly funding the exploration of that question without ever being willing to publicly admit why. Robert Monroe was aware of the military's interest in his work. He was, by all accounts, ambivalent about it. He believed his hemisync technology and the Gateway Program had profound implications for human development and consciousness, therapeutic, philosophical, spiritual. The Army's interest was in whether it produced intelligence assets. These are very different framings of the same technology. Monroe continued to work with military participants at his institute, but he maintained throughout his life that the program's deepest value had nothing to do with espionage. Edgar Mitchell was not part of the Stargate operational program, but his trajectory and the program's trajectory ran in parallel, drawing on the same research community, citing the same studies, and pointing toward the same fundamental question. Mitchell brought scientific credibility to consciousness research from above, from the astronaut corps, from MIT, from the highest altitude human experience available. Stargate brought it from below, from the intelligence requirements of a Cold War, from the practical question of whether psychic perception had military utility. They were approaching the same door from different directions.
In 1995, the CIA commissioned a formal, independent evaluation of the Stargate program. The evaluation was conducted by the Monroe Institute for Research, a scientific organization with no prior involvement in parapsychology. They were given access to all program records, all session transcripts, all operational mission files. They had one job: tell us whether it worked. The evaluation produced 2 conclusions that were simultaneously encouraging and damning. The first, from statistician Jessica Utz, was that the data showed a statistically significant anomalous effect, that remote viewing performance was consistently above chance at a level that required explanation. The second, from psychologist Ray Hyman, was that the methodology of the studies was insufficiently rigorous to support the conclusion that a genuine psychic effect had been demonstrated. Both were credible scientists. Both reviewed the same data. They reached different conclusions. The CIA read both reports and terminated the program. The last day of the Stargate program was in 1995. The personnel were reassigned. The files were archived, some classified, some eventually released. Joseph McMoneagle had already left the program by then. He retired from the Army in 1984 and continued to work as a civilian contractor. He has continued to give lectures and write books about remote viewing. He maintains to this day that the phenomenon is real. He maintains this with the same quiet certainty he apparently maintained through 450 classified missions. Whether that certainty is evidence or faith is a question without an obvious answer.
When the Gateway document went viral in 2021, the dominant interpretation in many comment sections was that the CIA had proven astral projection was real. This requires a careful correction. The CIA commissioned an assessment of a program. The assessment concluded that the program produced brain states that were measurable and interesting, and offered a speculative framework drawn from physics for why those states might have informational value. It did not conclude that out-of-body travel is real. It did not conclude that humans can contact other dimensional intelligences. It concluded that the question was worth taking seriously. That is a different thing. The deeper problem with the Gateway document, the Stargate program, and consciousness research generally is a problem of methodology. Science works by producing results that can be independently replicated. The Stargate program's results were classified. Replication requires access. Access was restricted. This created a closed loop. The program produced results that could not be fully verified by outside scientists because the data was secret, which meant the results were both used operationally and permanently unverifiable. It is a structure that makes rigorous evaluation impossible, and that serves the interests of both true believers and institutional funders. The scientific consensus on remote viewing, telepathy, and out-of-body experience is, broadly stated, skeptical. Multiple independent studies, not classified, not funded by intelligence agencies, conducted with rigorous controls, have failed to replicate the results that Stargate claimed to produce. The most comprehensive independent meta-analysis, conducted in 2010, found no statistically significant evidence for remote viewing beyond chance. This does not make the people who spent decades on these programs foolish. It makes them people who pursued a question that had a negative answer. That happens in science. It is how science works. And yet, the question does not go away. It does not go away because it is, at its root, the oldest and most insistent question human beings ask. Is consciousness more than matter? Is there something about awareness that exceeds the physical brain? Is there a connection between minds that transcends distance? The CIA asked this question with classified funding and military personnel, because the alternative, that the Soviet Union was asking it and finding answers, was more frightening than asking it themselves. Edgar Mitchell asked it because something happened to him 200,000 miles from Earth that his engineering training could not account for. Robert Monroe asked it because he left his body one afternoon in 1958 and never stopped wondering where he went.
The missing page 25 of the Gateway document has generated more theories than any single absent page probably deserves. Some argue it contained the most sensitive material, the actual operational applications, perhaps methods too classified even for the rest of the classified document. Some argue it was simply a clerical error. The CIA's reading room coordinator, when contacted by journalists after the document went viral, said the page had been missing from their files for as long as they could determine. The original may be in a physical archive somewhere. It is possible that page 25 contains something extraordinary. It is equally possible that it contains a diagram of a filing system. The fact that the Gateway document is available at all is a consequence of the CIA's CREST program, CIA Records Search Tool, which has, since the 1990s, been making declassified documents available through the National Archives. The CIA has released millions of pages of formerly classified material through this program. The Gateway document is one of thousands. The fact that it went viral while the others did not is a function of timing, social media, and a particular cultural moment in which the idea that the government had studied the impossible felt simultaneously like a revelation and like something everyone had always suspected. There is something specifically 21st century about the way the Gateway document became famous. A classified file, produced in 1983, digitized by the National Archives, publicly available since 2003, discovered in 2021 by a social media user and shared to millions of people within days. The pipeline from government vault to public consciousness has never been shorter. And this creates a specific challenge. The context that once surrounded classified information, the briefing rooms, the trained analysts, the institutional frameworks for interpretation, disappears. What remains is the document and the audience and the space between them where understanding should be. Robert Monroe continued to run his institute until his death in 1995. He wrote 3 books about his out-of-body experiences and the Hemisync program. He maintained to the end that what he had explored was real, that consciousness survived the body, and that the Monroe Institute's work was among the most important undertaken in the 20th century. He died at his home near the institute he had built in the Blue Ridge Mountains. His institute still operates. The CEC units are still in use. The Hemisync recordings are still available. Whatever he found or didn't find, he found it in the same mountains until he stopped finding anything at all. Edgar Mitchell spent 40 years after his moonwalk navigating the gap between 2 identities. He was the MIT engineer, the Navy captain, the astronaut, a man of proven technical brilliance who had done something only 11 other human beings had ever done. He was also the man who had felt the universe breathing during the return from the moon, who believed consciousness was non-local, who spent decades convinced that the government was hiding things that needed to be said. He died in February 2016. His obituaries noted both, the moonwalk and the mysteries.
he would probably have wanted both noted. Joseph McMoneagle retired from the Army in 1984 with the Legion of Merit. His citation noted his contributions to intelligence collection, without specifying, for obvious reasons, the methods. He continues to give lectures, write books, and conduct what he calls demonstration sessions for researchers and journalists. He remains perhaps the most credible voice for the reality of remote viewing, precisely because he is the least mystical person who has ever argued for it. He does not talk about chakras or dimensions. He talks about data, about mission files, about results that exceeded chance by a margin that statistics cannot easily dismiss. He asks you to explain that. He will wait.
Underneath all of this, the Monroe Institute, the Stargate Program, the ESP experiments in the Apollo capsule, the classified report with the missing page, there is a single consistent thread. Governments are afraid of things they cannot measure. The Soviet parapsychology program frightened the CIA, not because the CIA believed psychic powers were real, but because the CIA could not be certain they weren't. Uncertainty is the most dangerous thing in intelligence work. You can defend against a known threat. You cannot defend against a threat you don't understand. So you study it. You fund it, you classify it, you study it for 20 years, and then you terminate it, and you hope the question goes away. The question does not go away. 21st century neuroscience has made extraordinary progress in mapping the brain. We know which regions activate during various mental states. We know the neural correlates of memory, emotion, and perception. What we do not have is a satisfying account of why any of this is accompanied by subjective experience. The hard problem of consciousness, philosopher David Chalmers' name for the question of why there is something it is like to be you, remains unanswered. This is not a fringe position. This is the consensus of the field. We do not know why matter becomes experience. Which means the question that Monroe, Mitchell, and the Stargate viewers were asking, whether consciousness is more than the brain, is a question that honest science has not yet closed. The Gateway document is still available. You can download it from the CIA's public reading room right now. It is 49 pages, plus an introduction, plus the gap where page 25 should be. It will not tell you that astral projection is real. It will not tell you that the CIA has evidence of other dimensions. It will tell you that in 1983, a United States Army lieutenant colonel spent considerable time and effort trying to determine whether a businessman's accidental out-of-body experience in 1958 had strategic military applications. And it will tell you that the answer was, maybe, we're not sure. Keep looking. The government spent $20 million on that same uncertainty. Make of that what you will. Robert Monroe left his body in a room in New York in 1958 and spent the next 37 years trying to understand what that meant. Edgar Mitchell walked on the moon in 1971 and came home carrying something the mission profile had not accounted for. Joseph McMoneagle nearly died in a restaurant in Austria in 1970 and discovered on the other side of that experience something that the Army paid him to use for 17 years. 3 lives, 3 different approaches to the same impossible question. None of them proved anything that satisfied everyone. All of them remained convinced that the question was worth the cost of asking. Here is what we can say with confidence. The CIA spent $20 million over 23 years investigating whether psychic perception had intelligence applications. The results were ambiguous. The program was terminated. Independent scientists largely failed to replicate its findings under controlled conditions. An astronaut conducted unauthorized ESP experiments from the moon and spent 40 years arguing that consciousness was fundamentally different from what his engineering training had told him.
A businessman accidentally left his body and built an institution around the experience that trained military personnel and remains operational today. All of this happened. It is documented. It is, within the limits of what documentation can establish, true. What it means is yours to decide. And page 25. Perhaps it contains something extraordinary. Perhaps it contains the conclusion that McDonnell was too cautious to include in the rest of the report, the finding that changed everything, the moment the science and the impossible finally touched. Perhaps it contains a filing reference. Perhaps it was never written at all. We do not know. And there is something fitting in that. A program built around the idea that certain information exists beyond normal channels, with one crucial page forever beyond reach. The document about the unknowable has its own unknowable inside it. The history of the Gateway process, the Stargate Program, and Edgar Mitchell's lunar experiments is not a history of proof. It is a history of serious people taking seriously a question that respectable institutions preferred to leave alone. Some of them were right about some things. None of them were right about everything. The universe is large, and consciousness is strange, and the relationship between them is still, despite everything science has achieved, not fully understood. The CIA knew this. The Army knew this. Robert Monroe knew this before either of them asked. And somewhere in the Blue Ridge Mountains, in a small room with headphones and a padded floor, people are still lying down and asking where the edges of their awareness actually are. The answer remains pending. The questions these programs tried to answer are not resolved. They are, if anything, more alive than ever, because the science of consciousness has advanced far enough to confirm we don't fully understand it, while not advancing far enough to explain it. The CIA studied astral projection. An astronaut experimented with telepathy from the moon. The Army trained soldiers to perceive information at a distance. This happened. The documents exist. The people were real. The only question left is the oldest one. Is consciousness larger than we think? $20 million and 23 years said, maybe. The universe, as always, has not yet confirmed or denied.